Can I get a drum roll, Curtis?
I don't have my sticks. Hold on.
Hopefully that's coming through. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Backyard Tabletop.
And then right there, you're gonna add in a like people like a cheering crowd.
Okay. Yeah, I can do that. I think I can do a better intro though. Can we do it again?
Sure.
Okay.
You want me to drum?
All right,
Wait,
Kurt.
do you want me to drum roll again?
I'm gonna ask you to. You ready?
Yeah. Okay.
All right, Curtis. Can I get a drum roll, please?
Uh-huh.
Hopefully that's picking it up. Welcome to the Backyard Tabletop Podcast. I am one of your hosts, Jacob.
Oh, that's where I'm the other host, Curtis.
Now I'm gonna have to edit that down, Curtis. Ugh, that's okay. I'll leave it in.
Good.
Well,
pause for comedic effect.
Pause for comedic effect, indeed. I wanted to start off this podcast with talking about one thing that's very dear and near to my heart, and I believe you too, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I love the thing we're going to talk about.
So the reason why I wanted to talk about this specific subject is because I'm constantly having to explain to my parents that I'm not an evil child. I am actually the creative one.
Yeah.
Are you silencing your cell phone? Because I just remembered that when you pulled out your phone.
No, I was going to find your email so that I could have your notes as well.
Perfect. Okay. Yes. The thing we're talking about, Curtis, is Dungeons and Dragons.
I feel like that's where I should have had my drum roll.
Oh, that would have been
It's
good.
too late.
Okay.
It's too late.
We're going to get our feet under this at some point.
We'll get there.
We'll get there. I wanted to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, and honestly, that's probably what we're going to be talking about most of the time on this podcast, Dungeons and Dragons, because it's just something great to talk about, honestly.
It's something we love.
We love.
You know, it has endless possibilities.
So
really, you'll never run out of things to talk about.
That's the hope, anyway. We can do this into our 90s.
Well, we'll talk about where the future will lead us eventually.
But it's starting today, and we're going to be talking about really just explaining what this game really is. Mainly so I can send this to my parents, and they will have a grasping of what it is that we do every Saturday. And in fact, we're coming off quite a high from Dungeons and Dragons because we literally played every day this past weekend.
Yeah.
And we're going to be playing tonight with a little one-on-one one-shot later, part 2.
Yeah, just to, give an example.
Yeah, and every single day it was something different. And I just want to explain it so I can send this to my parents to realize that I'm not crazy. I'm not evil. I still have a soul. And here we go. Dungeons and Dragons, Curtis.
Can you take that one more time?
One more time?
Pick up.
Dungeons and Dragons, Curtis, is a tabletop role-playing game that millions of people play every year.
Millions.
If not more. Now,
maybe billions. I would even go as far to say as trillions of people. More people
since the
than
70s,
are
right?
on Earth right now play Dungeons and Dragons.
Somewhere else in the galaxy.
Somewhere.
For sure.
People are playing some kind of tabletop RPG.
Exactly.
It's one of the things that all societies will eventually invent. It's one of those
multiple timelines.
Yeah,
right?
Yep.
That's
it's an inevitability.
Exactly. And I think it's important to note that Dungeons and Dragons isn't the only role play tabletop game out there. It's just the one that we know the best, and it was also one of the first, if not the first. I think it was the first. I know
the first of its kind.
The first of its kind.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what they were playing back then were, I guess you wouldn't really call it role play games. They were war games. Essentially.
Right. Strategy games.
And D&D kind of evolved out of those things. And even when D&D started, it wasn't really a role play game either. It was just, it was role play in the sense that you would make a character and embody them. That's really all role play means. Yeah, role play is just method acting.
Method acting. Yeah, which we'll get into the nitty-gritty for sure, but I just wanted to say right up front that we know Dungeons and Dragons more, but there are hundreds and hundreds of different types, right? There's Pathfinder, StarCraft, I think is one. There's Monster of the Week, Call of Cthulhu, and the list goes on and on and on.
Yeah, and there's even role-playing games that are made specifically for like specific what's the word? Just like worlds. Like there's Star Wars role-playing games that are
Star Trek,
their own thing. There's Star Trek. There's basically if you have like a show or a pop culture thing that you really enjoy, there's probably a role-playing game that is either based on that thing or will get you real close to feeling like you are role-playing that thing.
Exactly.
Monster, like you mentioned, Monster of the Week. That's a role-playing game that's essentially built around those old Monster of the Week TV shows, like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and all that kind of stuff like that. So yeah, there's a role-playing game for everything,
literally anything. But Dungeons and Dragons is unique in the sense that it was one of the first, and it's just so customizable. Those other ones are customizable. The setting can change, but they're, like you said, we mentioned that there's hundreds of different ones that have their own rules, but there's also a bunch of people that will take Dungeons and Dragons and put the rules in with, say, Star Wars or something like that. It's just very moldable. It's very moldable. You can
mold it.
Exactly. You can fit it with.
That's kind of hard to say. It's very moldable.
Moldable. Yeah. So you can take like a setting and fit it into the world of Dungeons and Dragons. Dungeons and Dragons is just a set of rules, and that's really what makes it different than just playing imagination when you're a child. Is this idea of it's taking your imagination and giving it rules, and now you can share it with everyone at the table.
I like to say Dungeons and Dragons is essentially just collaborative storytelling without sometimes there is a written story and a way it's supposed to go, but a lot of the times it's all just I'm scrunching my face up to try and remember the thing that I was gonna say. It's all improv. It's all improvisation.
All improv.
Yeah. And that's what makes it really fun, because there's no like formula or anything. Like if you get 6 people at a table who all have brought their own characters and their own ideas to this table on what kind of story they want to tell, you're never going to come across the same game twice.
Exactly. You can literally play the same adventure twice and get 2 different outcomes because of the different ideas that people have.
And we'll explain what we mean by adventure.
Exactly. Yes, we definitely will. But let's talk about what you need in order to play this game, specifically Dungeons and Dragons. That really came up on the mic. I didn't mean to. That's why I moved it behind my mic.
Is your knuckles cracking?
Yeah.
Nice.
What you need to play Dungeons and Dragons is friends, hopefully, but you can also play with strangers if you so desire.
Against the wishes of your parents, maybe.
The wishes. Mm-hmm.
That's the one time that like it makes sense for your parents to not like that you play Dungeons and Dragons is if you play with strangers.
If you play with strangers.
Stranger danger.
Stranger danger, right. I mean, hopefully they're nice. You can play at conventions and stuff like that with strangers, but hopefully they'll be nice. Typically, you need friends. And then when you have those friends, one needs to be the game master or the dungeon master, as it's called in Dungeons and Dragons, but game master is the more broad term.
Mm-hmm.
And you need
blanket term.
Yes. And you need player characters or PCs, as they also come be known. Once you have those things, then you're able to play the game with a set of dice. Mm-hmm. Dice is something that's added to the game because that's what makes it different than just playing imagination at that point. Because the dice add this thing of, can you succeed at said thing that you're trying to do in the adventure?
It makes it an equal playing field. Because there's always
Right.
that kid when you guys are playing imagination and the kid is like, no, I have a force field that no lasers could pass through. And then you're like, but I have lasers that could pass through laser-proof force fields. And then it's just a fight
It's a
at that
back.
point.
Exactly.
So the dice bring a feeling of levelness to the playing field. Like everyone, the dice essentially are chance. They
Our
add
chance.
randomness to the game so
Yeah.
that it makes it interesting, and it makes it so that everyone can play on an evil playing field. No one's too overpowered from another person because anyone can succeed, anyone can fail.
Exactly. I've even heard it said that they add fate to your game. And if this is a fantasy game that you're playing, a medieval fantasy of sorts, that's really cool if you think about it.
Yeah.
It adds an element of, even like, we'll get into like the rules and nitty gritty, but if your character sheet says that you might be bad at something, right? Maybe you have a -1, and I'll explain what that means later, but maybe you have a -1 to your persuasion, but you happen to roll really good. So in this sense of moment, your character is above something. And that's something we all can experience. Sometimes in life, we may be really bad at something, but we step up to that occasion because maybe we're getting out of our comfort zone or something like that, trying something new. And that adds something a little bit to the table. Maybe you do have a chance to succeed at something, even if you happen to be bad at it.
Right. And the same thing goes for the other way around too. If you're really, really good at something, if you're the Olympic champion gold medalist for archery, you're still not gonna hit a bullseye every single time you
Right.
use a bow. And so that's what the dice bring into. There's all sorts of other things like we'll talk about like modifiers and things like that, so that if you are really good at archery, you might have a crazy modifier that makes the chances of you missing almost zero, but there is still a chance.
And that really adds something to the enemies as well, because when you are playing this game, when there's people that are coming against you to try and make you fail, it's that much more cool if you fail sometimes and succeed sometimes, because that's what ultimately makes really good villains in the end, right? If they have just as much chance of success as you do, that adds something, a little bit more drama to the game in that sense.
Right.
It's, if you think of the classic Star Wars, it wouldn't have been as cool if Empire Strikes Back didn't add something, a little bit of drama to it, and the Empire won in that one, right? And then ultimately you came back and, the Jedi wound up succeeding, but it just added so much more drama when the villains win sometimes.
Right.
And still having that chance of the villains winning is just like, oh man, you start sitting at the edge of your seat, and that's when you leave games a little bit more stressed when you first got there.
And the great thing is, in the game, there is no, like when you go see a movie, obviously there's that part in the back of your mind that's like, of course the good guys are going to win. Otherwise, it would be a bad story.
Right.
Because it's pre-written. Why wouldn't he write it to where the good guys win? But when you're going into a D&D game, you might not win. You might have to run away. You might lose and have to start a new game.
Yeah.
That's what makes it so much more interesting and just like gripping for me, because when I go watch a movie, I'm like, yeah, bad guy's here, okay, whatever, he's gonna lose eventually. But when I walk into a D&D session, it's like, oh my gosh, what are we gonna do?
What are we gonna do
this time? Because there's real stakes.
Yeah.
You might not succeed.
Yeah, and that's just adds a new level of storytelling to it, because there's formulas when it comes to writing a book, writing a novel, script, movie, etc., etc. But that randomness that is added to Dungeons and Dragons, where you don't know exactly how the story is going to go, makes it a new thing, a new formula. It even kind of does away with the formula at that point,
Right.
because then you're And you don't know. The dice are kind of telling you what to do at that point.
There's even literally like a taboo against people who write too many story beats into their adventures.
That's a good point.
We call that railroading, because it feels like you're taking the choice away from your players. If you have pre-written all of these story beats and they need to happen, you end up having to either take choice away or push your players into choices to get them to where you need them to be.
Right.
You know, there's always a give and take. When you come to the table with a game you have written and a story you have written, the background of, you expect your players to give into it a certain amount to, you know, like when you start a game and you go, oh my gosh, there's someone over there on the hill getting attacked. You have to go help them. What are you going to do? And the player goes, what's on the other side? What if I turn around? What's over there?
What's over there?
You know, that's terrible.
Yeah, right.
because there's a thing there. When you're a player, you should also want to explore and discover the things that your GM has created for you, you know? Speaking of which, we should probably talk a little bit about what being a GM means.
What being a GM means and what players. Yeah, I think that's a good segue into it, because as much as the dice can tell you where you succeed or fail, there's still choices added to the game. Mm-hmm. And there's still things that you need to do as a player and things that the dungeon master needs to do as a dungeon master or game master. The game master is the one that kind of has the world set up, right? He is the J.R.R. Tolkien, if you will. He is the quote-unquote author of the story, or has a background prepped for the story that you're going into.
I like to think of it almost as he's kind of the opposite of an author, because where an author will write a story and then fill the world to make that story make sense. I mean, you can do it that way, absolutely. But I feel like the way that a lot of GMs work is they build a world and then create story beats in it for the players to find and explore.
Exactly. So in a sense, you're less of an author, maybe more of a designer might be a better way to put that.
Like a world designer. Yeah, exactly.
Right. You design what's happening in this world. And then the players come along and I've heard it explained that they're the lifeblood of the story. That's what brings the life to the story. Mm-hmm. Because they're the only things, like the DM pretty much controls everything. He's the designer. He controls the NPCs, the non-playable characters that they run into. You know, he's the barkeep at the tavern. He's the random beggar on the side of the road if you happen to go talk to him, type of thing. He fills those roles. So he makes choices for those and whoever else that the players aren't. And he can't decide or can't choose what the dice do. Exactly. Those are the two things that he can't control.
He's also more of a, in the barest of terms, if you're just playing a game that is entirely pre-written and the GM hasn't necessarily created anything for the game, he is still also the referee of sorts.
Right.
He is the person who decides whether what you're doing requires this type of role or this type of role, or if it's doable at all with the rules of the world or of the game type, you know. So the players don't sit down and go, I'm going to roll this and then roll the dice.
Right.
The players sit down and they say, I want to do this. And then the GM says, okay, this is how you might be able to accomplish that. Roll this.
Right.
So the GM's the person that basically, like all the players do essentially, is tell the GM what they want to try and do, what they want to accomplish. And the GM figures out how that is going to come to fruition.
Right. And on the flip side of that, the players have to be interested in the story. So the game master comes with a setting, a design, and then the players come up with what we call PCs, player characters.
Mhm.
You make a character that lives in the world that the DM has made. And ultimately, you're the one that pushes the story. It's like the DM, the dungeon master, has so much work in prepping everything. And then when the actual sit down at the table and playing, he kind of gets to sit back and let the players mess with the world. So I kind of like to think it flips, right? Throughout the week, the week leading up to the game, the dungeon master is getting ready. He's prepping everything, making sure everyone has names, the bane of my existence. And then the
or
players
at least has a good list of names.
At least has a good, yes.
To drop one on the fly.
Exactly. He's the one that has kind of the quote unquote beats of the story kind of prepped for when they kind of happen upon it. And then when the game happens, he gets to kind of sit back and like, okay, what are you guys going to do? And then the PCs kind of now take the initiative, and that's when they're kind of doing their work.
While the game is being played, the GM is almost entirely reactionary.
Right.
The players say, I want to do this. And so the GM says, okay, well, when you do that, this happens. Or when you go in here, this is what you see. Or when you roll that and get that result, this is what happens. Or this is what you need to roll to try and get that result. Right. They're the ones that they sit back and tell the players what happens when they do what they do, essentially.
So at that point, he becomes the narrator.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good way to think about it.
Yeah. So
narrator or storyteller.
Exactly. That's what you need. And we're not really here to tell you how to play. That's not what this is about. This is just explaining what it is. So yes, there's our rules that the dungeon master needs to know in order to get there. There's rules that the PCs need to follow. So just kind of basic ones. We're going to talk a little bit about the character sheet that the player makes. And we're probably going to talk about this a little bit more in part 2 of this section when you build your character that you're going to play tonight, and then I'll be the dungeon master tonight. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but there are essentially your character sheet is the rules that you go off of as you play the story. Because it's important to note, when you sit down to play the game, you're not making choices as Curtis.
Right.
You're making choices as Cormac or whoever it happens to be that you're playing.
Right.
You have this idea of a character. I'm just going to use an example. Like, let's say you want to play a character that is a little bit like Aragon, right? So you sit down at the table and you want to make sure you make choices like Aragon, right?
Right.
I am by no means as good of a swordsman as Aragon, but my character is. So I get to kind of know what it feels like to be him in that moment. And the character sheet is what kind of helps me guide me in that step.
Right. So yeah, like if we continue with that idea of Aragorn, ear of corn. Yes. If we continue with that sort of idea of that, he's a reluctant hero of sorts.
Yep.
He loves his people and his country and all of that, and he does his best. And when he sees a need, he can't help but get involved to provide what help he can. So if you're a much more passive person in real life and you're not necessarily heroic, because let's face it, most people aren't heroes,
right?
Some people just aren't built that way. But if you're playing a game where you're being an adventurer, you're being a hero, then when you walk up to that person who's getting attacked on the side of the road, don't think about, oh, I'm just going to ignore that and keep walking like you would if you were walking the streets of New York or whatever.
Hopefully that's not what you do.
Well,
I understand what you're saying.
I'm just going by statistics here.
Yeah, go for it.
No, but think about, man, if Aragorn saw an innocent person getting beat up by a bunch of orcs, he'd run over there and pull his sword and take out those orcs, right?
Right.
And so that's what you have to think about.
Exactly. So that's where the fun comes in of this game, right? As a player, that's the fun part. You get to make up a character. Maybe it is someone like you see in media. Maybe it's a completely one that you just made up. Or maybe it's most of the time, at least for me, when I go to make a character, I see someone immediate and I change it to kind of make it work how I kind of want to play.
Mm-hmm.
And
A lot of times, I think a really common thing is people will take parts of themselves that they like and then exemplify those sometimes in the characters that they create,
right.
and then sort of dim down the parts of themselves that they don't like.
Right.
So, a lot of times people will make people that are really charming if they feel like they wish they could be charming, or things like that, and you kind of get to step into the shoes of what you think it would feel like to be the hero that you could maybe be.
Right. That's really fun exploring those different parts of yourself. And, in some cases it's pretty therapeutic, right?
Mm-hmm. Can be. Yeah, it can definitely be cathartic.
And that's where this game kind of really kind of takes on a whole new level sometimes. Yes, this could be a game that you just play with your friends, but being able to really push into the story, causing dramatic moments, maybe acting as someone else that you don't normally really act like. It's kind of cool exploring those different parts of yourself, because I really enjoy it, right? It's like I'm tend to be a little bit more of a social person, but so when I sit down and maybe I'm playing a shy character, it's kind of fun to just sit back and watch everyone else kind of do it. Or maybe it's vice versa. Maybe I'm a shy person and being extrovert, trying to get into the conversations is something a little bit fun, and I like exploring. So yeah, I mean that's kind of what a dungeon master, a game master, and a PC is. So, Curtis, let's talk about when it comes to sitting down and playing the story. What is the world? What is the story? And what is the improv that goes into this game? We've been talking a little about it, but let's kind of dive into that.
I just realized I sniffled into the mic, and I feel so terrible about that.
I appreciate you apologizing.
Yeah. So, I mean, realistically, the world can be anything you want. I mean, technically, Dungeons and Dragons has a canon world that it is based in, that all of the stories that the people who write Dungeons and Dragons, the world is based in a world of their creating. But you can take the rule set of Dungeons and Dragons, like we talked about, and place it in any world you want, even ones that you make up on your own, which is very common. A lot of people make their own worlds, fantasy, sci-fi, horror, whatever, that they will use these rules to create stories in. The more common ones for D&D are usually fantasy based, so heavily influenced by Tolkien and Lord of the Rings and things. There's orcs, there's goblins, there's elves, there's dwarves, there's just about anything that you can generally think of as general fantasy tropes, are in the world, maybe with slight twists and differences that you wouldn't necessarily expect. But yeah, I mean, any story you're wanting to tell or world you're wanting to explore and play around in, you can do that.
Do it. Yeah.
It's really, the rule set is a tool, and just like, you can use a hammer to put in a nail or take out a hook or whatever, you can use the rules of D&D to play Lord of the Rings or play Alien. It's really whatever you want to make it.
Exactly. And I know for me, it's such a huge creative outlet, right? Because that's something I've kind of been doing in my head since I was a kid, right?
Absolutely.
I've made my own worlds in the Star Wars universe, right? I've in my mind have played in the lands of Middle Earth. Mm-hmm. And it's always been a dream of mine to one day be able to create my own world. And I've done that. I've managed to get a friend who's really good at drawing, and I kind of got to design a continent of a world that I completely made up for a homebrew world is what it's kind of typically called. Mm-hmm. And it's such a huge creative outlet, because at that point it's such a, oh man, now I get to I get to come up with my own world. I get to, what are the characters that are going to be in there? How do people normally see elves in this world? How do people normally see humans? You know, are goblins the maybe typical fantasy trope of them being evil, conniving little creatures? Or in this world, what if they're just like humans? People just see them as hobbits or that's copyrighted, as halflings in that world.
Copyrighted. Can't say
please don't. No, that's super fun to be able to think about and build, and now approach your character. And it's like, normally that's how this is, but in this world, it kind of works like this. Mm-hmm. And then coming up with reasons and why, and your own history, and you know, that's just so fun, and just gets my mind going of different choices and different ideas that you can come up with and add your own twist on the quote unquote tropes of the fantasy world.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite things about being able to play in a homebrew world is one of the things we've done with one of my characters that I played in your game. We should probably mention Jake and I have both GM'd a lot and also played a lot. We kind of switch back and forth in roles, but we tend to be the two DMs at our tables.
Right.
But one of the characters I made in your game was in a world that you made, and so it was really freeing for me to almost work with you to create new rules for the world you've made. Like, right. I was able to say, my guy was the inventor of firearms in your world, like old world firearms, that's basically flintlock pistols, you know. And if you play in something like a pre-written D&D world, there's probably already someone who's done that, and so you're a little more restricted in that way. Now still the possibilities are endless, and if you want to, you can change anything you want in the story, but it's going to have echoing effects, of course. But it was just really fun being able to be like, well, the way I've written this story for my character, it would be really interesting if they were this and were able to do this. And you were like, okay, cool, I'll write it in. I mean, I invented a whole city that's now on your map just for my character's background.
And that's what's super cool. And at that point, it comes back to, it's a collaborative storytelling game, because then I took that idea and I was like, heck yeah, let's run with it. So now in my world, that character that you made is the only one that's ever used guns, you know, the pepper boxes and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So that made me go back. It's like, okay, so what are cannons like on ships?
Yeah.
Right? Because you were the first one that character was the first one to come up with gunpowder. So how are they protected? Is it just ballistas? You know, and I got to kind of experiment with stuff like that. And so now when you go explore that, maybe that character goes on a ship, you as a player, Curtis, you get to look at this like, oh yeah, Jake just totally took that, and now it's just that much more rich for that character. It's like, oh yeah, that character really did something to the world, you know?
Yeah. If you're DMing in a world that's pre-written, those things are still possible. It's just you have to get a little creative with things.
Exactly. So now, once you kind of have the world kind of set up, now you kind of go into a story or adventure, as they're more commonly called. Mm-hmm. And that's when there's a couple different ideas. It can be a pre-written one, as you had mentioned, more commonly known as modules. You know, there's classic ones out there. Dragon Heist is one. Curse of Strahd is one. You know, the list kind of goes on and on and on.
One of the more common sort of beginner ones is Lost Mines of Phandelver, which is it's a really great adventure to get people into the game, because it's just railroady enough to pull your characters along if they're still not quite in the mode of making their own decisions.
Yeah.
And they're just kind of expecting to be told a story. But it gives them a lot of opportunities to make those decisions if they can show the initiative and have an effect on the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's great to get them involved, because that is something that like we keep in mind. You know, there are different levels of play. You know, when you first start, it's very intimidating to really kind of approach the table and be like, when the dungeon master looks at you and he goes, okay, what would you like to do? And you as a player go,
what can I do? I don't.
What's on the menu?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
I mean, just like if I don't know if anyone's ever been to an improv class that's listening to this, but it's the same thing,
exactly.
Or an acting class. It takes time to be able to open up and get creative and show that side of yourself and take those risks of what if what I'm going to do sucks.
Exactly. Or, even when you're with friends, it's still a little bit intimidating at times because you are being a level of vulnerable with your friends because
absolutely.
Not everyone is an actor. Not everyone is completely comfortable. And I think it's just, it's very important to note that there are different levels of play. There's newer people to the game. And then at this point where with our normal group that we play, everyone just jumps right into it, right? It still may get a couple sessions to really kind of understand where you're going, but when you're able just to jump into it.
Well, I think at this point the hardest thing for our group is jumping back into the character that you've made and remembering the decisions that you made with their backstory and things like that, and making sure you play them well. If you have a particular voice you want for them, or they make particular choices or things like that, stepping into that skin, very similar to like improv or like acting, method acting or anything like that. It takes time a little bit sometimes. When you're maybe 3 sessions in playing that character, it's a lot easier. But the thing we don't really have issue with anymore is playing with each other,
right?
Because we're all familiar enough with each other now. We've been playing D&D with our group for a couple years now that it's easy enough, and we can trust each other enough to not, think weirdly of each other if we make certain decisions in the game and things like that, because we know it's a game, and the decision I make isn't because I, as Curtis, want to make it. It's because I, as Curtis, know that if this was a book, that character would do that thing. And that once you really understand that and get that, it definitely alleviates a lot of that pressure of, oh my gosh, what if I do this and it makes them really angry?
Yeah. Right. And that just comes with practice, understanding what you're able to do with this game, understanding your character and understanding the rules.
And just getting comfortable with the people you're playing with.
Exactly. So when you kind of step in to play a story, it's important to note, the DM essentially has an idea in mind, right? Just to kind of pull one out of my butt here. Let's say...
Gross.
Yeah. It's just an idea. Don't worry about it.
Okay.
Let's say it's like essentially, we're just going to do a very simple analogy here. You're all sitting around at a table at a tavern.
Okay.
You're all enjoying each other.
All right.
Each other's company, I should say.
Okay.
Company.
Yeah.
You're enjoying each other's company. You're all just having a good time, and you're approached by a man that says, "Hey, there was a bunch of crazy creatures."
What's your name?
You son of a... Names get me every time. I'm trying to come up with an analogy here, Curtis. Okay. Yeah. So it's a man approaches you, offers like, "Hey, there were these crazy creatures that came and attacked my farm last night. Could you come and help me out, see what it was, and put my family at ease," or something like that.
Yeah.
The players need to go do that. But how they go about it is very much up to the characters. That's essentially the story. The DM presents them with the starting point, and now they have to go figure out what creatures it was. How do they do that?
It's like a choose your own adventure book. You're all going on the same adventure. Like the book is the same adventure every time, but the choices you make and the directions you choose to go and how you choose to do things is going to decide whether you succeed or fail, or how well you succeed or fail.
Right.
And there's even, that's most games.
Yeah.
Right. There are even games where there is no quest. There is no story. There's no thing made out for you guys. There is a world that the DM has written, so that when you guys walk into a city, he knows this person works at that shop. This person runs the city. This is what the government is like. This is what this is like. And he has certain opportunities written into that city for you guys to find, but it's your job to explore this world and do the things you want to do. And in that type of game, it might be perfectly normal for you to go look and someone says, "Oh my gosh, our family needs help. Come and help us." And you look at them and go, "No, no, we're busy. We're going to go do this other thing."
Yeah.
And the DM's not going to look at you like, "Come on,
Really?
just do it."
Just do it.
Because in that case, he goes, "Okay, well, if you don't do that, that means those people are probably going to die, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah,
This is going to happen here."
Has that.
And then you go do off the thing that you wanted to do in the first place. And he's totally fine with that. That's not most games.
Yeah.
That takes a lot of work. And usually if you're doing something like that, that's probably the only game you play.
Right.
Because it's just so big and takes so much effort.
Mm-hmm.
But, I feel like there's a lot of people that feel like that's just what D&D is like,
Right.
because of a little thing called Critical Role.
Yeah. Very small thing.
That's not what it always is like. It's certainly a lot of fun.
Oh, yeah.
And
no,
it's great.
Add on to that. It's like, honestly, that sometimes is the most rewarding as for both a player and a dungeon master.
Yeah.
Or a game master. Because on those specific type of games that are ran like that, usually it's heavily drawn on the characters and the backstory that they have written for their players.
Right.
Which is kind of...
It's more player focused.
Right. And I didn't mention when we were talking about the players and the dungeon master, I didn't really mention this because I want to mention it here. The characters come up with a backstory for their characters that they bring to. It's not... I feel like sometimes...
Or at least it's heavily suggested that you do. Sometimes it's not going to come super into play, but it's incredibly helpful for determining the choices that you're going to make as a player.
Right. Yeah, that's what I was going to say is it doesn't have to be crazy complicated. It could be very simple, but it does help you play. And, when you get to those homebrew-like worlds, even if it is simple, usually the DM draws on that to help motivate you. Because that's, I think, what makes a good game master is motivated. I think... In fact, I think it's a little bit more important for a dungeon master to be less of a writer and more about like motivating your player characters, less of a
well, and if you're trying to motivate your players, it helps having the skills of a good writer, because that's what good writers do. They get you hooked,
right?
So obviously, like, you don't want to just build an open, empty world and just say, "You guys go do a bunch of stuff. Go do whatever you want to do." No, you create things that are going to happen, things that might hook your players in, things that would interest your players. And just, those games are also incredibly reliant on the players providing the initiative to move the game forward, because if the players just go, "Well, if there's nothing jumping out at me, I guess I'll just sit and drink in the tavern or
become a farmer."
Yeah, I'll just
I'm waiting for a PC to come to me and be like, "I want to be a farmer."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, then that player's backstory is he becomes a farmer and then it gets burned down by orcs, and so he becomes a fighter because he has a vendetta against orcs.
Orcs, exactly.
Yeah,
that's a great backstory.
There you
and
go.
Essentially, it can be very simple like that, and the DM can use that to motivate your players. And so. Sometimes it's not just always one adventure. Sometimes you have a couple different ideas or quests going because it's a world and the players have a choice to go do the things that they want to.
Yeah.
And it's fun as a dungeon master to live off those choices that they do. Going back to your example you did before, if they do not help that family and they go off do their own thing, well, when they do their own thing and come back to that town, maybe the town's taken over because whatever that thing that was attacking that family.
Right.
Now attack the town, and so they got to live with that consequence.
Yeah, I mean, that's another good writing thing is, your choices have consequences. If you step away from that family who says we need to do that, they don't just sit there and wait for you when you come back. It's not like those things that are attacking them are just going to wait and not attack until you come back. If you go off and take a week at sea and then come back, those people are gone.
Right. Right. So that's where, to me, it differs from like a video game in that sense.
Yeah. I mean, there's some that do those things, that your choices have consequences, but
right.
few and far between. For
right.
Sure.
Or where certain things in games will wait for you. Right. So it's like absolutely. In a game, you might have 3 different quests and you can do them one after the other and nothing would really change. But in a game like Dungeons and Dragons, where, the DM doesn't have to, but he might take that and it's like, okay, time is still passing while these other things are going on. So while you're doing that other thing, this other quest has now got a lot more complicated, or maybe even more easier or something like that from something you found in something else. So that's kind of the creative side of Dungeons and Dragons, and what I really enjoy. It's such a huge outlet for writing for me. And I mean, there's so many other things that Dungeons and Dragons appeals to, right? And I think that's what makes this game so different and probably so satisfying to play, because you might be more of a writer, but your friend sitting next to you, maybe he's more of a artist. And when he thinks of a character, he draws all this amazing art. And that's kind of where he kind of gets his kicks from the game, because he loves coming up with characters and ideas and gets kind of into that side.
He loves the design and just the things that he can imagine in his head.
Yeah, exactly. And the player across the table, he's more into making the best.
Or she.
I apologize. Thank you. You keep me on track.
I'm just
kidding. She or he, they are sitting across from you, and maybe they get really into the numbers of the game, because we didn't really talk about it, but everything in the game, I guess with the dice, we did talk about it a little bit. But they get really into the number crunching and trying to make the best possible character that they can.
Right.
And they do all the multi-classing, and stuff like that. Maybe that's what they get into.
Yeah, like I'm much more of a methodical and cerebral person than Jake is. He. Sorry, I didn't mean for that to sound like I'm smarter than you. Yeah. That's not what I mean at all. I'm just
you are, but
I'm just more in my brain. You're more creative than I am. So to me, when I GM or DM or whatever you want to call it, my main takeaway from it is, I love creating encounters. And what I mean by that is, like, if you guys walk into an alleyway and you get attacked by thugs, I love the just sort of tacticality and the ideas of these fights, or trudging your way through a dungeon, and there's traps that you have to get through, and coming up with all of those little intricate problems for you to solve, I think is what I would say.
Yeah.
I enjoy creating problems for the characters to solve.
Yeah.
And that might just mean making quests, but to me, I get a lot more joy from like building the fights and building the enemies and building the dungeons that create these issues and things for you to overcome.
Yeah, for sure. And for me, I get really into the writing. Like you said, that's kind of what scratches my itch, my creative itch. I get really into the writing, and anytime my players come to me with a backstory and I take that, come up with ideas and talk with them, it's so much fun to me, because you're creating something together, And I also get really into the acting, because like the improv kind of adds a lot of the acting to it.
Yeah.
It's because drama happens in the game, because we're humans, right? We love to create drama, and that's why the entertainment industry is so big, because we just love drama, and that's fun.
That's something else we also haven't gone super in depth into. Obviously, we'll talk about these things more as we just talk, because obviously we're going to talk about it. This is what we love to do. But the game doesn't even have to have conflicts,
right?
Like battles. It can be a game of intrigue. You could just be a bunch of spies entering a party, and you have to talk your way through. And if a fight breaks out, that's bad.
Yeah,
like that's failure.
Yeah,
and especially like the intermingling just between the players. I love it when there's moments where the DM just gets to like sit back for 10 minutes and just watch his players talk to each other.
Exactly.
And have conversations in character, role playing out these people that they've created, these stories that they've made, and how they start to intermingle with each other is, I don't know, there's just something really interesting and beautiful about it, because it's not written, it's not predetermined, it's role play, it's life.
Yeah.
But telling a story.
Exactly.
And I think as humans, it's something that we are almost hardwired to do and enjoy. I mean, you look throughout the annals of history, and storytelling is huge. It's, no matter what culture you've ever seen or understood or researched, they all tell their stories.
Exactly.
And it's, I don't know, this is just one of the best ways to do that communally as a group.
Right.
You're telling a story that everyone is coming up with on the fly, and it's, I don't know, sometimes it's exhilarating, sometimes it's terrifying, sometimes it's sad.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
It's great. It's a lot of fun.
No, 100%. And like you said, it's kind of like, especially as being a game master and setting the scene up, and then having your players take it and for many minutes are just role playing. It's kind of like I created something for you and I get to watch you play with it.
Literally yesterday,
it's so fun.
Literally yesterday, I was DMing a game for you and some other people, and it was like, I think I sat back and just kind of did background prep for like a good 30 minutes at least, because the characters were just having a talking moment. They were planning what they were going to do, and understanding the things that they had come across up to that point and what it means to them and where they're going to go. And it's like, suddenly I stop what I'm doing and look back at the screen, and you guys are still talking. And I'm like, wow, that's really cool that I've built something, and they've all built something enough that they can just sit there and talk for 30 minutes in character and have a blast doing it. It sounds so weird.
It does.
But
it really does.
You get so into it. It's crazy.
And something you really can't explain unless
it's so hard to explain to somebody, which is exactly what we're doing right now.
Yeah.
We're trying to explain it, and it probably sounds insane.
Yeah, we're
to
probably
people who have never done this, but it's I don't know. Hopefully just the sound in our voices and the way we talk about this
can just
helps you understand that it's not just a bunch of insane people, but it's actually something that's enjoyable and beautiful in its own way.
Oh, yeah. Still, one of my favorite moments that has happened in a game, we were all playing online, and it was a sea adventure. And I specifically remember you got an insane perception check, which essentially means your character was looking for something, and you rolled incredibly high. You also had this thing on your character that made it be so high.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't supposed to be a thing. It was just something in my notes that you guys were being followed.
Mm-hmm.
And you had to have rolled really high in order to see it. And your character saw it.
You never intended for us to notice.
Exactly. And I had to say, it's like, yeah, you see another ship like the size of a pen needle way out there. And you recognize that's a ship. And you guys literally debate. I kid you not. You debated for probably about 45 minutes on if you were going to continue on and head to the island where you were going.
Pretend like they're not there.
Or stop and wait till night and go and
Ambush
board
them.
the ship.
Yeah.
And I had not planned on that conflict. You guys were waiting, and I was like, oh, shoot. If
And
they
so-
decide to go to the ship, I have... So I was literally prepping that battle while you guys were debating.
Whether or not we would go do that battle.
Exactly. I was sitting there like, oh, crap. And we were using a website called Roll20, which is a virtual map website.
It basically creates a tabletop on your computer screen so that everyone can, from different places, you can be on a Skype call and all see the same table, essentially.
Exactly. And I wound up just Googling ship, and I got a different ship because you guys were already on a ship. I plugged it in. I was grabbing a bunch of tokens, which would be the enemies, in that 40 minutes, and it got to about 45 minutes, and I'm pretty sure, I think it was you. I can't remember if it was you or another person that was just like, all right, let's just go. And I was like, oh man. And
yeah,
we had that battle.
I'm the person that's like, okay, we've been talking in circles about this for 45 minutes. We're worrying too, like, that's the point where it gets almost like it's not the characters worrying about it, it's the players worrying about whether what they're going to do is have serious consequences for the game or not. And so I got to the point where I was like, we need to stop thinking about this like it's a game and just say, if I'm sitting here on a ship and being followed, am I going to board that ship or am I going to continue like nothing happened?
Yeah.
And we decided, okay, we're gonna go board and figure out who they are, what they want, and get rid of them if we have to.
Yeah, still one of my favorite moments, and it was just
it was great.
Afterward, I was just like, "That's what this game is all about." Literally talking.
I mean, I had another moment that was not even battle focused, but two of my characters were trying to find out where they could get diamond dust because they needed it for something they were trying to do. And I was like, well, there's nothing in it. Because I tend to run things from the book.
Right.
So I was thinking about it, and I was like, there's nothing in the book about anyone in town who might have something like that. I guess I could just say that the trader in town could get it ordered for them. But I had done that already like 3 different times for different stuff. And so I was like, okay, the trader tells you that there's a person down the road who tends to cut his gems for him when he makes jewelry. He can go see if they have any diamond dust. And then both of the players were like, well, we'll go with him. And I was like, oh, okay, I have to now think of who this person is, why they do this, how they do this, where they live, what their name is, what race they are.
Yep.
And so I was like, as you guys were, I think I switched over to someone else who was having a conversation. And as they were having that conversation, I was like thinking of all this stuff and thinking about where on the map the house would be. And then he took them to this place, and it's like a little shack. And you walk in and you see this gnome in there with this crazy frizzy hair, and he's got spectacles on. And I basically made up a jewelry maker / watchmaker / tinkerer.
Yeah.
On the spot.
Mm-hmm.
Because my players needed it.
Yeah.
They needed a place to get this thing, and I had to make it.
Yeah.
So that was like one of the first moments I've gone that crazy off book and just invented something that did not exist before. I tend to change things that are written in the books. I tend to evolve them and change them to fit our story that we're trying to tell better.
Yeah.
Which is also a very common thing. Very few people, I feel, run the book exactly as it is written every single time.
Yeah.
Because people are going to make decisions that don't necessarily fit in the lines of the book. But, it was so much fun just sitting there and going, welp, I need to improv for the next 30 minutes straight and act this person, give them a voice, give them a life. And it was great.
Yeah.
Everyone was like, wow, that character was really cool. Like, and we talked about it later, and I was like, yep. Made it up in 5 minutes. And they were like,
Bada bing,
wow,
bada
that
boom.
was so cool.
Yeah.
It was so fun.
I totally, man. And I honestly think, thinking back to the games that I've run, that's usually where the most fun happens, is when you guys get out of your comfort zone. And in this sense, the dungeon master gets out of his comfort zone and has to make something up on the spot because the players did something he wasn't planning to. And I mean, that's kind of why we play this game. We get such a adrenaline rush when we play this game, you know, and you get to experience a lot of emotions, you know, that aren't necessarily just always fun.
Yeah.
Right? Because yes, 100% this game is a lot of fun, but sometimes getting conflict going and having this moment of maybe in character where you're having an issue with another character and maybe you have to work it out in the game. And then afterward, when you take a step back and you're back at quote unquote is yourself, you talk with that player and it's like, dude, that was so much fun. Yeah. In the moment,
you hated each other's guts.
I hated you, but you're still friends in real life. And you just, it's just kind of goes back to that acting.
It's the same. It's the same. Like, why do we listen to sad songs?
Yeah.
Why do we watch horror movies? Why do we do all those things? It's because those emotions are necessary and they're fun. Not, I don't really want to say fun, but they're important to explore, I think. Because in the moment it might not feel fun. It might feel terrifying or sad or whatever, but after the fact, it's kind of therapeutic, very empathetic.
Yeah.
You know, you step into the mind of a person that is not you and you experience things that you haven't experienced. And of course, this is talking about very heavy role play, which is also not everyone's deal.
Yes,
there are going to be games out there that are just a dungeon crawl where you're just slaying monsters, walking through traps, getting treasure, and getting out. And that's totally fine too.
100%.
I mean, that tends to be what we do for things like a one shot, like we're about to do. It's just, you just want to hang out, have fun, have a good time, and so you play the game almost like it's a video game or a board game, and that's totally fine too. But I think the thing most people are scared of or worried about or think is taboo a little bit is that role play. And really, it's the same thing as if you've ever acted in a play, or if you've ever been in an improv class, or played a role-playing video game where you get into character, or read a book that you were so invested in the characters that you literally wept when you read the last page. You know, I don't think those are unusual things. I think people have that happen to them all the time. And it's because you are being empathetic towards that character that you're reading about, that story that you're reading. You want them to succeed or not succeed or whatever. And that investment into the story is the thing that's so captivating.
Because I think, like, going back to that tiers of play with level of how new you are to the game, it can be applied to the roleplay classic counter. And for me, you know, you can just be a dungeon crawl, and that can be totally fun. But what makes it so much more impactful for personally me, it's like that just scratches the surface of what this game has the potential for.
What it can be.
Right. Yeah. Because for me, you know, being kind of that nerdy kid, having all these worlds in my head, I had no outlet really to pour that stuff into, right? Yeah. So when I started playing this game, I was like, now I have an outlet, and not only is it for me, but now I can experience with it with my friends these moments. Like, hey, I created this for you, and now you're in it, and that's why I play.
I mean, we haven't even touched on the thing that I feel like actually a lot of parents or people from a certain generation are scared of, and the fact that there's spells and demons and creatures and things that to them are taboo or scary or represent something that is not okay. I think the thing I tend to say about that is, then don't include them.
Yeah,
You don't have to.
exactly.
You can play an entire game that is just realistic,
Yeah.
that is in the real world, and
Mhm.
there are no demons, there are no spells,
Yeah.
there is no witchcraft, if you want to call it that. But like I said before, this game isn't a game to, explore those things necessarily. Those things are just there for the conflict.
Mhm.
And if that's what you want it to be, and you want it to be a game where you slay demons, great.
Great.
But it's a tool. The rule set is a tool
Mhm.
used to tell stories.
Yeah.
And those stories can be anything you want them to be.
Right.
And sometimes that can be dangerous.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can get a little over your head and get too deep into character and lose yourself. It's happened. People get addicted to the role play and things like that. I mean, you see it with actors all the time. When they're going deep into their characters, they lose themselves sometimes, but it doesn't have to be like that, and rarely does it ever get like that.
Exactly.
I mean, we've never had an issue like that with us, because I think at the table we all talk to each other. We all understand where we are and what we want out of it, and just how far we're willing to go. We don't want it to not be fun at the end of the day.
Exactly.
We don't want it to be torturous. We do it to have fun, and we do it to hang out with each other and explore these opportunities to tell stories with each other. That's why we play. It's not to explore the inner depths of our souls until we pull each other inside out. That's not why we play.
Exactly. No, and I think that's a great place to kind of end this on, because really, for me, when it comes to what I would tell parents that think this game is evil, is do the research. Don't just go off of what you've been hearing, because it's so easy to look at something from the outside or just hear something about it and assume that's what the game is. But sometimes we need to experience what it feels like to defeat evil. You know what I'm saying? And so, yes, 100%, you can leave it out. Yeah. And do your research and like, hey, these type of things, know yourself. If you're a parent, know your child, what they have issues with and what you has issue with, and have a conversation about, this is what I don't prefer. Yeah. But the whole point of the game is to be a heroic. Can you make a game that isn't that? Yes. But traditionally, it's designed for you to kind of come out with the players at the table are the heroes, the ones that vanquish the evil, right? Right. And that's really fun to be. Yeah. And it may be, you might go through some hard times through the adventure. Yeah, there might be some dark moments, but that just makes the end, or ultimately the climax of the story, just that much more powerful. Right. So,
well, and if you, I feel like most people that would have an issue with this because of, the satanic panic or whatever you want to call it, I feel like most of those people probably agree that The Lord of the Rings is a great book and it's really good, and would have no issue with their preteen or teenager reading that book, because obviously, yes, there's war and there's grime and there's hatred and there's evil, but ultimately the story that is told is one of triumph over evil and the ability of the little person to make a difference. And that book is filled with demonic imagery and evil orcs that eat people and
that's a very good point.
And things getting their heads chopped off and all that kind of stuff, but also that's not the point of the book. That's not the focus of the story. And you can use those things, you can use that imagery. One of the good guys in the book uses magic, right? Like,
yeah, 100%.
Like magic isn't an evil thing in that world. I mean, it can be, just like anything else. It's a tool, but you think of that story and how all of those people praise it as being a great story of good versus evil. That's exactly what Dungeons and Dragons is based on.
Yeah.
It is heavily influenced by Tolkien's works.
Yeah.
And that fantasy setting of elves and orcs and, quote unquote demonic type creatures like Sauron and Balrogs and all that kind of stuff. It's not the content of the story that matters. It's the point of the story.
Yeah. It's the themes that you want to explore.
Exactly.
And usually that's heroic themes.
Yeah.
At least that's why I like playing this game. It's
right.
It's fun being able to explore those stories. So
sorry, one more thing.
No,
I know you keep trying to end. The best
No.
The best thing about it is that you read a book, there might be some stuff written in there that, yes, are actually definitely topics you might want to avoid and aren't necessary for the story. Best thing about D&D is you can just say those aren't there.
Yeah.
You can just avoid them.
You could
because
avoid
you're
them.
in control of the story the whole time. You're not consuming it. You are creating it.
I think that's a great place to end this podcast.
Right.
No, I think that was great. So we should quote that, put it on a t-shirt. In the end, you're creating the story.
Yes.
And that's what makes this game so much more personal.
Yeah.
And makes it really, really above anything else that I've experienced. And it makes for a great hobby.
For sure.
And I think another person has said it best, because he's a parent and he loves Dungeons and Dragons. And he has said, in the end, when parents just finally sit down and watch their children play this game or other people play this game, they go, oh, they're just talking.
Yeah.
They're just talking a lot.
Yeah.
That's
yeah, exactly.
That's what this game is. Like, you're just talking.
You don't sit down and open your book and incant a circle onto the book and
right.
and summon a demon to play through. No, you just talk to each other.
Nothing like that. You're just talking to each other.
Yeah.
And in the end, what are we humans other than just talking to each other?
Yep. I mean, that's exactly what we're doing right now.
Yep. Yeah. So thank you, everyone, for listening. I know this probably was really rambly. We tried our best. We're getting we're getting our feet under us, but
we had outlines and we followed them pretty well.
Good. I think we did good.
First time, not bad.
Right. I think that's a good point. Probably editing this, I'm going to be like, oh God,
what are we doing?
No, it's like this is episode 1 over a long time. So thank you for listening. There's going to be a part 2 to this. That's going to be a one-on-one one-shot. So all the things that we talked about, you can click part 2 and see it in action.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. I've been Jake.
I've been me, Curtis. That's me.
Thank you for watching. Take care.